So you've got an Evo Softail that you would like to make into an Evo Hardtail. Is it possible? Of course it's possible. That is the bike you are looking at on screen right now, a 1994 Evo Softail, which has been hardtailed. Now, for the longest time, I was under the impression that hardtailing one of these bikes was either too complicated or just too much of a gamble. What if I tried it, ruined the stock frame, and then it didn't work out in the end? I'd be out a bike and out the money for the hardtail. But now that I'm on the other side of this procedure, I can say with certainty that the process is not as complicated as you think. So today I'm going to answer the question you guys have been asking me since I started this channel. How did I hardtail my Evo Softail? I'm Grease, you're watching Grease's Garage, and I'm going to help you skip the struggle. Now, let's jump in with the first question that you and everyone else is probably wondering: which hardtail did I use? The hardtail is made by a company called Road 6 Customs, and it is made for a Shovelhead, not an Evo. At the time when I was doing this project, there were no companies making Evo Softail hardtails. And I had decided to go with the Road 6 because my buddy in his shop had used that particular tail to do this exact project, and I was essentially applying the same formula to my bike. So that's how I found Road 6. I have no affiliation with Road 6 Customs. It's a Shovelhead hardtail. It's a very simple budget model. I believe it was less than $300 at the time when I bought it. The axle plates are not the cast kind. There's no fancy features, but the tail works. The tail comes with no instructions whatsoever. So if you've never done a hardtail before, there's nothing in this box that's going to tell you where to cut or how to put the tail on. At the time, I was still running a Chopper podcast, so I did place a call to their customer service or their shop line just to see what the experience would be like for somebody calling in. And I was told that installing the tail is pretty effing self-explanatory. So I can't necessarily say that they're going to be there to walk you through the whole process. I'm sure they sell a lot of these tails, and I'm sure they are very busy. As far as the quality of the tail itself, it's been great. I've had no issues with it. It doesn't have any fancy features or cast axle plates, but it also doesn't cost a ton of money. Now, there's lots of other companies that make Shovelhead hardtails, and pretty much any Shovelhead hardtail can work in this application, so you don't have to buy the same one that I bought. I'm just telling you what I used so that if you wanted to do the exact same thing I did, you could do that. All right, we're on to the install. So you've got in front of you your stock frame, which is completely disassembled, and then you've got your hardtail section. So the first cut we're going to make on this stock frame to start clearing room for this hardtail is the two lower rails. Now, like I mentioned earlier, there is no instructions that come in this box with this hardtail. So where are you going to make those cuts? That we're going to determine right now. The way I did this was I took the hardtail and I measured from this spot right here, the center of the rear transmission mounts, forward to the end of that bottom rail. And what we're going to do on the stock frame is measure the same distance. We're going to go from the stock frame's rear transmission mount, we're going to go forward the same amount, and we're going to go an extra eighth. And the reason we're going to go that extra eighth is because you want there to be about an 1/8 inch gap between the rails when you're setting up the weld joint. If you were to cut it the same length as the actual hardtail measurement, the stock lower rail and the hardtail lower rail would smash flat up against each other. And if you've never done a weld like this before, you might not know this, but you need to first bevel both of those ends, and you also need to have that slug exposed in the middle of these rails, because you don't just want to melt the outer two rails to each other, you want to melt each outer rail to the slug and fill that entire gap between those two bevels. I'll roll you guys in a quick shot of the tape measure right here from the center of that rear transmission mount to the center of the weld on my lower rail. Now that you've got your lower rails cut, the next step is going to be to cut your upper rails. Now, I'm going to roll you in on the frame right here. This is the stock Evo frame. And as you can see, it's got this gusseted area where the tube is much thicker than just the factory tubing. We're going to use the end of this gusseted area as our measuring point. You can see in this shot right here, I've got the 1 inch mark on my tape measure right at the edge of that gusseted section. And from the edge of that gusseted area to the center of my weld is 1/2 inch. So we want to make that cut about 7/16 of an inch from the edge of the gusseted area on that top rail. Now, the reason we're doing this here instead of just cutting this flush with the gusseted area is because you want there to be some actual tubing sticking out so that you can bevel it and blend two tubes together into a slug that are the same diameter. If you were to cut this flush, you wouldn't really get that seamless transition from one piece to another because you'd be going from a frame tube right into a gusset and the weld would just be like a big blob making that transition. So I preferred to do it like this. I suppose you could do it the other way. You could cut it flush, but this is how I did it and this has worked out great for me. So I'm just sharing with you my method. All right, so now that you've got your lower rails and your top rails on your stock frame cut, you are ready to start the mock-up of your hardtail. Now, I will tell you right off the bat, the top rails on this hardtail are much too long. And this is not a defect or an issue from the manufacturer. This is because this hardtail is meant to go onto a shovel head. And now that gusseted area you've got on your Evo, which looks like this, on a shovel head, it actually looks like this. And the tail that you're working with is meant to connect to the rails much further forward on the shovel head. But that gusseted area on the Evo means that installing the hardtail that far forward just isn't possible. So what we're going to do in this section is trim these rails back so that it matches up perfectly to where your Evo wants this connection to happen. But to my recollection, these upper frame rails were about 2 inches too long from the factory to work on the Evo. But you don't have to take my recollection as gospel because I'm going to show you the easiest way to do this. And that is going to be to take the lower slugged sections of your hardtail, plug them into the lower rails on your stock Evo frame, and go to fit up those top rails. Now, they're obviously going to be way too long in the beginning. What you're going to do is trim a little bit off and then put it back in and see how it fits. Trim a little off, put it back in to see how it fits. Now, how are you going to know when the fit is right? This is the important question that you need to ask. And the answer is you need to look from the side of the bike at your lower frame rails. And what you're looking for is for the lower rails to come into perfect alignment with the rails of your stock frame. When the rails up top are too long, your lower rails are going to look like this because there's too much material up here blocking them from coming up and sitting proper. So what you're going to do is trim these top rails little by little. Once those two rails have come into perfect alignment at the bottom, that's the sweet spot. No more cutting of the top rails. You are done. Sorry to interrupt your video, but did you know that I am now getting into the live streaming game? If you would like to have one of your questions answered on our Grease's Garage live stream, the link to the Patreon page is on the screen in front of you. Click on either the Motivated Builder or Pro Builder tier. Either of these tiers gives you the options to submit your questions for our live streams. Join us for some fun. I'll go through your questions. We chat with each other. It gives me a way to get to know you guys and for you guys to get to know a little bit more about me. Thank you for supporting Grease's Garage. Now let's get back to the video. From this point, it's just a matter of doing the welds on the tail. Now, everybody's got their own opinion on this, but I'll tell you personally, I like to weld them in a jig. This is the process I did, and even though you can put a transmission plate between your hardtail and your stock frame that will technically align the two, I prefer to have this thing in a frame jig. I use a Chop Source frame jig, not sponsored by Chop Source. I just bought this probably 5 years ago when I started doing frame fabrication. It's been working great for me ever since. Big shout out to Chop Source for making a great frame jig. I recommend you use a frame jig for every frame that you weld. But regardless of what you decide to do, complete all the welds, the 2 welds on the top rails, the 2 welds on the bottom rails, and you are done. Now, as I said before, the transmission is going to complicate this just slightly. For me, I was keeping that 4-speed. So what I had to do was weld closed this hole right here. This is the front left transmission mount. And on the Evo frame, the spacing is just a little too narrow. So that front left mount had to come just a little bit out in order to match up to the correct plate. And the way that I did this was I welded the hole shut, I ground it smooth so there was nothing there, I laid the plate on the hardtail and the front mounting section, and I bolted the 3 holes that do line up. So now you've got your plate exactly where it needs to sit. This gives you a perfect view down that front left hole to make your new center mark. Drill it out, and you're done. Now you can put a 4-speed plate directly into your half shovel, half Evo frame. It might sound complicated, but it is very, very simple. You're welding a hole closed and you're drilling a new hole. If, however, you're not like me and you'd rather run the 5-speed transmission, this rear left post that you're seeing on the screen right now, this is the one that you are going to want to move. And essentially, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to take your 5-speed plate, you're going to bolt up the 2 bolts that go in the front of the transmission mount, you're going to bolt up the back right transmission mount, which is also going to line up, and that is going to give you a perfect, clear shot of where that back left post needs to go. Now, this is not what I did, but if I was doing this, the way I would approach the welding would be to have that post already cut off. I would actually put that back left bolt into that post, right, as it's just free floating on that cross member. So I would bolt all 4 bolts in, have that post bolted up, just floating there, and then tack all 4 sides of the post, take the bolt out, then put the bolt back in, make sure it goes in and out without any issues, and slowly make the welds in opposing corners, right? You don't want to just go from one section of this cross member post and weld all the way around because you might pull or bend it with the heat distortion. So you really want to just weld this corner, weld the opposing corner, and then the other 2 sides as well. And along the way, you can always double check, make sure that bolt can thread out and thread back in. So guys, that is how I did it. This is the exact procedure that I followed to hardtail my Evo Softail. But you might be watching this video and thinking, well, Grease, I don't have all the equipment I need and I don't feel comfortable doing all these modifications that you're talking about. Is there another option for me? And the answer is yes. There's now an Evo Softail hardtail on the market, and it's made by a company called Crispy Co. Now, before I started filming this video, I actually reached out to Crispy Co. and I told them what I was planning to shoot, how I was going to explain the process of modifying a shovel tail to fit an Evo, but that I also figured some people might want to just buy an Evo tail directly. And the good folks at Crispy Co. said that they would give a discount code for you guys, the Grease's Garage viewers. So if you are not interested in modifying a shovel tail and you just want to have a very plug-and-play option with no guesswork, Crispy Co. is that solution. I will put that discount code right here so you can see it, and the link to the Crispy Co. hardtail down below in the description so you don't have to look around to try to find the product. Big shout out to the guys over at Crispy Co. for doing something great for the Grease's Garage community. I appreciate that. And before anybody asks, no, I do not have any sort of affiliate link. I don't get any sort of kickback, whether you buy the shovel tail or you buy the Crispy Co. tail. My job on this channel is just to give you the options. You know how I did it. Here's 2 different ways you can do it. You be the judge at what's right for you. I've got no dog in that fight. Now that you've got your hardtail all squared away, I want to say congratulations, but also be careful because this is where people start to lose track of their build. They finish their hardtail and then they have no idea what comes next. But fortunately for you, I know what comes next, and it's all broken down in this video right here. All of the information you need to finish the rest of the plan to finish the rest of your build. So check that video out. Thanks for watching Grease's Garage, and I will catch you guys next week.